special guest in the studio today, Jeff Liles, longtime friend Jeffrey Edwin Liles, here with us today.
Hey, Russell.
And we're going to have a lot of fun talking about, we want to share, basically, I want to start the whole thing over. So don't feel, here we go. Ready, Ted? It's funny to hear them yell in there. But who wants the things on your head, right? All right, so let's start over. 3, 2, 1. Hey, welcome everybody to the Russell Hobbs Show today. Very special guest in the studio with us, my old friend Jeff Liles, a.k.a. Jeffrey Edwin Liles. How are you?
Good. How do you do?
Doing great. Good to see you.
Good to see you, too.
So we're going to talk today and get to know Jeff better, and we'll ramble around and just talk about things that are interesting to both of us and have a good time here. So let's just start out with this. I know you grew up in Richardson, so tell me about what it was like growing up and what do people not know about you about your childhood?
Well, I actually grew up in Dallas, far north Dallas, in that little space between Richardson and Addison. Back then, when we moved into our house, I think that was 1968, the street one block north of ours was the furthest paved street in Dallas. So basically, it was almost on the edge of the country. I mean, there was still like a tiny little farm town between North Dallas and Plano that was called Renner. And Renner is where we used to race dirt bikes and shoot BB guns.
Rabbit Run.
Rabbit Run, yeah, of course. And, that's where I grew up. I remember when I was a kid, we just moved into that house, and Channel 8 News did a story about drug use in high school. And the reporter was standing in front of Richardson High School at the time, which would have been the high school that I was supposed to attend before they built J.J. Pierce. And I think that reporter was Bill O'Reilly, actually, when Bill O'Reilly was a local reporter for Channel 8. But I remember our family was sitting there eating dinner, and the TV was on, and that came on. And that was the first time that we'd ever heard about drugs on TV, or at least teenagers using drugs. And I can remember my father saying something to my mom, "Is that where Jeff is going to high school?" And they were like, had a serious conversation about it, like, what are we going to do, because they didn't want to introduce me to that element. I was still in elementary school at the time, but they were already thinking that far ahead. And anyway, like I said, they built J.J. Pierce in the meantime. And I'd gone to Westwood. If you lived north of Arapahoe Road, you ended up going to Pierce. If you lived south of Arapahoe Road, then you went to Richardson High School. Both schools were like a mile down the Coit Road from each other. And two incredibly different schools. Pierce was almost like going to prison every day. They had chains on the parking lots, and it was real expensive school. You could just tell the students were more high-end students. They came from families that had a lot more money. Richardson, on the other hand, was right down the street, and it was a mixture of everybody. I mean, it was a good cross-section, a good diverse cross-section of everybody. And I went to Pierce the first 2 years of my high school in 10th and 11th grade, and transferred to Richardson my senior year, because most of my friends from junior high all went to Richardson. They all lived on the other side of Arapahoe. So anyway, going to Richardson was pretty amazing. It was a real eye-opening experience getting to meet kids from all over the world.
Yeah, let me touch on that. It's so funny to sit here now, and you and I have known each other since like 1985.
Yeah.
And I grew up on the other side of Richardson. Mm-hmm. And it's funny to hear you say it was the edge of the country, because I went to Berkner, so I was on the east side of Richardson, and at the end of our neighborhood were solid cotton fields.
Yeah.
All the way to Rabbit Run.
Yeah.
Because we'd ride our bikes up there before I got a dirt bike.
And remember the Jimmy Dean Sausage Factory?
Yeah, that was on
that was right by the golf course.
Yes, on
Cheryl
the
Park golf
Greenville wind down. It was called Owen's Country Farm.
Yeah,
actually, before I think it was Jimmy Dean's. Anyway, so it was odd because all that was there were black dirt cotton fields, mm-hmm. all the way to Plano, which was a small town, and every 3 or 4 miles, you would see an old farmhouse that would be working the land.
Yep, absolutely.
And then Collins Radio. So I was on the other side of town, you were on the west side of Richardson doing your thing over there, and we didn't know each other. And then, as destiny has it, your lives weave together later in time, right? So now we're looking back. It's funny because I play soccer now with people that went to Richardson High School with you. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so tell me more about what it was like, coming up in high school.
Oh, it's what's funny that you actually mentioned the cotton fields. That's what Dallas is known for. That's why Dallas as a city exists. It was a cotton depot. That was its. It's in the middle of a land mass. It's not on a border. It's not on a port. Basically it was a cotton depot, and that's why it existed. People, talk about what Dallas is known for outside, the awareness of living here. It's basically known for that first as a cotton depot. Then it was known for JFK, obviously, being assassinated here. Then it was that stupid TV show in the 80s, Dallas, which really had very little to do with Dallas.
And now it's the Cowboys.
Now it's the Cowboys. Cowboys having won, 5 Super Bowls over the years. And now, we're kind of at a crossroads because we got to figure out what Dallas is going to be next.
Well, it's pretty well being figured out for us. The whole world's moving here. And I'm really sad to say I see a lot of the Dallas history is sort of just being run over and forgotten. It's a big global city. It really is.
Well, I mean, every place has a history. Every place has something that started out defining what it was. Do you know what La Reunion is? Have you ever heard of La Reunion?
I've heard that used in many ways. Which specific?
Reunion Arena and Reunion Tower, all that stuff was named for La Reunion. And what
Right.
La Reunion was in the 1800s, it was a French socialist colony that existed not far from downtown Dallas. And these folks were here for probably 2 or 3 years trying to make this utopian society. And basically what ended up happening is they couldn't grow crops. They couldn't sustain their necessary.
They had to have them damn capitalists come in with those diesel tractors and make it work, right?
This was way before diesel.
Just joking. Okay, so you were growing up in Richardson, and what kind of kid were you in high school? When I was in high school at Berkner, you had the freaks in the smoking area, the jocks and the socials, and I was kind of friends with everybody. I didn't really go.
I was too.
I could see you being sort of.
I was one of the few punk rockers, but first I was a freak. But on the other hand, I'm surprisingly, for the way I look and the experiences I've had, I'm really actually surprisingly conservative. Not necessarily politically conservative, but just conservative in my life choices. I've never smoked a cigarette.
Like your values and your behavior.
Values are part of it, but experiences are mainly part of it. I've never had a shot of hard liquor. I've only been drunk maybe a half dozen times in my life. I drank beer in high school maybe a half dozen times.
Well, that stuff we just gave you before the show was tequila.
Oh, well, that was not.
Wasn't right. I'm just joking.
That's cough syrup. No. But, I don't gamble or any of that stuff. I'm just, I grew up in kind of a conservative family, not necessarily like what today's modern political conservative is. I'm exactly the opposite of that. But, a lot of the choices I've made are less. I was hanging out with freaks, and I dropped LSD and stuff like that. But I never did shoot up, or I've never even, literally to this day, I've never even had a cup of coffee.
Well, I think from what I know about you, and we've known each other, like I said, since 1985, and we've been close at some times, and then apart at other times. But I know you have a strong family. That you grew up with a really good family, and everybody was caring about each other, and you were close-knit, so you always had that support system of family and friends.
Yeah, and we've got one of those families where my grandparents lived 2 blocks over, and my aunt and uncle lived 2 blocks on the other side of them. Cousins all live nearby. Everybody, we all went out to eat at least once or twice a week all together. Real fortunate in that respect.
Yeah, so I'm trying to get squeeze a little more of you in high school out before we go on to the next era. You know what I mean? Like, so walking down the hall at a typical day in high school, who was Jeff? You know what I mean?
Well, I'll tell you what. 1978, I was in 11th grade, and on January 10th, the Sex Pistols came to Dallas. And a couple of weeks prior to that, a guy named Randy Aiken, who passed away about, a month or so ago, gave me the copy of the Sex Pistols record. And he worked in a record store. He worked at Soundtown at Promenade Center. And I walked in the store one day, and he says, "There's Jeff. Give it to him. He'll like it." I mean, they played the record once in the store before. It freaked everybody out, so they had to get it out of the building. And so he gave it to me, and I took it home, and I listened to it, and immediately fell in love with it. You know from going to school in Richardson exactly what the curriculum is all about. That record was literally the first time I ever heard the word anarchy. It was the first time I ever heard the word abortion. It's the first time I'd ever heard the word bollocks. A lot of these concepts about, resistance against the monarchy in the UK, I didn't know what the UK was. So much about that record informed me about things that weren't part of our curriculum in Richardson schools.
That's interesting. That's profound.
Well, it just smacks you right in the face when it happens. That's why it's not me trying to be profound. That's just what happened.
Well, if you think about it, your typical life growing up in suburbia used to be, and somewhat today, is you're being indoctrinated to learn the history and the sciences and go on to university and get a job and get a mortgage and get a house and be part of the consumer society. And so your point is legitimate. It's like you were introduced to the counterculture and the revolution, so to speak, through a punk rock band.
Right. And also prior to that, you and I both got into the same 70s classic rock bands like Led Zeppelin and Frank Zappa and King Crimson and Yes and all those bands. And when you go to see those type of bands, back then when you went to go see those type of bands in an arena, the spectacle, all the lights, all the whole thing of being there with 10,000 people in a room, all of that in and of itself has more of an impact on you than just say their songs on the record. It's kind of like a concert was a big immersive experience. And so punk rock came along, and it was exactly the opposite of that. The record was really urgent, and it spoke to you on just kind of a real base level. But then when you went and saw the show, it was the exact opposite of a big lights and sound spectacle. It was a spectacle, but the spectacle was the audience in the way that they were interacting with each other. And like I said, on January 10th in 1978, the Sex Pistols came to the Longhorn Ballroom. And their manager at the time, Malcolm McLaren, made a specific effort to book them into venues that were like country venues. I'd never even been to a bar before that night. I didn't know how to act in a bar. I didn't even know if we were going to get in. But I had my $200 black leather pants that I had bought at Judy's in Valley View Mall. I had my torn T-shirt. I was one of maybe a half dozen punk rock kids at J.J. Pierce High School. Tickets were $3.50. Went down there with two other guys who attend Richardson High School and went in their pickup truck. Both of those guys are deceased now. We went down there, and the band wasn't any good.
Right.
The spectacle was that all of these people that were definitely counterculture people, but not hippies, not drug users or whatever. I mean, some of them were drug users, but not the same way that freaks were in the 70s, Being a part of that was the first time that I had gone to a concert and the artist didn't live up to the record. Their performance didn't live up to the record. They didn't have the songs together. They didn't have the...
Now, punk rock was a spectacle.
That's what it was meant to be.
It reminds me, though, off the subject, but on the exact subject, I saw Aerosmith, because I had the Toys in the Attic 8-track in my car for like 6 months.
Right, and rocks.
And when I saw Aerosmith at SMU, they were terrible.
They were sloppy.
The sound system.
I agree. Same thing as Texas Jam. They were terrible.
Live show ever. Yeah. Disappointment, right? So yeah, but back to the punk thing, it was more of an event than really a musical extravaganza like Zeppelin or somebody like that would be.
Well, the next day, I go to school. I didn't sleep all night after that. I was awake. I was still wearing my black leather pants from the night before. And I go to first period biology class. Coach Moore is the biology teacher. He's a football coach, And I'm standing, before the first bell rang, I'm standing in the back of the classroom, and I'm telling people about, I went to this place in South Dallas, this country and western place where these English guys were, I was telling them the whole story, And Coach Moore, he was like 25, 30 feet away. He couldn't really hear what I was saying, but he only heard key words of it. And after the bell rang, he goes, "Before we get started in class today, I'm going to let Jeff come up to the front of the class and tell everybody about his Sex Pistol."
Wow.
He thought I was talking about like maybe a sexual experience I had the night before or something.
Oh, wow.
So I said, sure. You know, I walked up to the front of the class in my black leather pants, and I was like, so last night, me and these two guys from Richardson went downtown to this, you know, country and western place with all these guys from England. We're all jumping up and down and spitting on each other and bleeding all over each other. Coach Moore was like, stop, Jeff. Are you high right now?
Wow.
I was like, no, I've been up all night, man. You know? And anyway, second period class, I go to world geography class. And Miss Graham, who was the teacher, she was really hot. She was definitely the hottest teacher at Pierce. Before the class started, she pulls me out into the hallway. And she's like, Jeff, look, those pants are amazing, but don't ever wear them to school again. You're being a distraction. I literally had to go home halfway through the day that day and change clothes.
Wait, was that a little bit of a teacher hitting on you?
I didn't realize it until years later. I didn't fully make the connection. I mean, I didn't, you know, I didn't understand what a backhanded compliment was until I was much older, you know.
That's right. Okay, so you're at high school. I'm getting a picture of, you know, we're getting a picture of what your type of person in high school. Now, how did you get into playing music then?
I wanted to be a rock star like everybody else. You know, I got cheap guitar at a pawn shop, played in a bunch of garage bands. I had a garage band called Wizard, and we did Pinball Wizard, you know, and we actually did a gig in an assembly at Highland Park High School that didn't go too well because they found out that we were from Richardson and let us hear about it. You know, doing gigs at rec centers, that kind of stuff. But the way that I met you was I joined this band called Group 6, and Group 6 was a punk rock band from the early Dallas punk era. They were called the Do back then, but they lost their bass player and changed their name to Group 6. And back then there weren't a whole lot of bass players in Dallas. And I knew how to play guitar, and I knew that the notes on the bass were basically the same notes on a guitar, just playing one note at a time instead of chords. So I said, yeah, I could do that. And I went and told Bill at Bill's Records that I was going to maybe borrow a bass from somebody and go try out for this band. There were really no bass players in Dallas, you know, back then. Bill said, I'll buy you a bass. And he bought me a maple Fender Precision bass, beautiful maple Fender Precision bass. And I went and tried out for this band, and I got in the band. And the other three guys in the band, two of whom are deceased now, but they were all about 10, 15 years older than me. And I was 22, 23 years old, something like that at the time. And I decided now that I was in this band that I was going to try and go get us gigs and stuff. And we made a little demo tape, and George Gamark played it on the Rock and Roll Alternative. So being that age and hearing your music on the radio for the first time was like kind of a light bulb moment. You know, whoa, I might be able to do this, you know.
Yeah, that's encouraging.
Yeah, so then I went down there, and I'm looking around town to find us a place to play. And I saw this art gallery, and there was a flyer in the window for Zeitgeist or some band that was playing at an art opening there. And I walked in there and introduced myself to you, and I don't know if you remember any of this, and I asked you if my band could play at one of the art openings. And you didn't listen to our tape or didn't even check out the music. You're like, yeah, sure, just come on down next Saturday or whatever. You know, you didn't have any idea what we sounded like. And all you went on was the fact that I told you we had just been played on the Rock and Roll Alternative. So I was incredibly excited that you had given us this opportunity to play. And I went back the next band rehearsal, and I'm telling you, couldn't wait to break the news to the guys that I had got us this gig, you know. And I got there, and they said, we decided to break up the band. And I was like heartbroken. I couldn't believe that, you know, are you kidding me? Now, you know, we're on the radio now, you know, we're getting gigs, and they're all three of these guys had day jobs, you know, they're married and had kids, they had lives, you know, being in a band was a hobby for them. I didn't have anything else going in my life. So I had to go back there and break the news to you that my band had broken up. And I remember you didn't even give it a second thought. You're like, why don't you stay here and help me find some bands to play here?
Well, here's what I remember is the band Animal Chance.
Yeah.
See, I think when Group 6 broke up, didn't you start Animal Chance?
Yep.
Because I met you, And like in March or something, you came in and there was an Animal Chance flyer.
Yeah.
And yeah, y'all can play. But that was after Group 6 broke up. You started that band, eh?
We did one show, I think, at Nairobi room.
Where'd you get? Who were the members of Animal Chance?
Oh, Bob Watson from.
Oh, all your friends from Richardson.
Yeah, Bob and JP, who ended up being the drummer and singer for Shallow Rain.
Oh wow, that I never knew that Animal Chance was Bob and JP. That's
yeah.
Okay, so didn't Tinch have some? You met Tinch though.
I met Tinch at Theater Gallery.
Okay, so you met Tinch at the TG
Yeah.
in Commerce. So what we're talking about now is 1984. The Theater Gallery started with art opening and bands playing, and then Jeff came and his band, and then so yeah, you and I hit it off, and I was like, man, I think you said, hey, why don't you let me help book this place? And I was like, okay, come on, let's go.
Well, I didn't really have an experience doing that.
Yeah,
and back then that was before the internet, before cell phones.
Yeah, it was
booking meant you had to go to a band show, write their phone number down, introduce yourself to them.
All I did was I sit in the gallery in my office, and bands came in, and I wrote them on a calendar because the world was coming to us, because it was a moment when there was all cover bands in Dallas.
Yep.
And now there's this place in Deep Ellum Ghost Town, and we're letting people come and do art and theater and bands. And it just was, we were in the middle of a hurricane, a vacuum, right?
Well, that's why Theater Gallery had such a lasting impact, because prior to that, the music scene in Dallas, you were in a copy band. You just were in a cover band, because you couldn't really get gigs anywhere unless you were. Even Group 6 played some punk covers.
Right.
Everybody played some kind of covers or some kind of copy songs, because the club owners at the time, back when the center of gravity for music in Dallas was on Northwest Highway with the Bijou and Cardi's and Agora and the Ritz and all that.
Was awesome. Too.
All of those club owners insisted pretty much that the bands play top 40 rock and roll cover songs. And so they did. And, if you were to ask me what musician in Dallas was singularly responsible for ushering in a new, creative, all-original music scene in Dallas, I would have to say it was Peter Schmidt. Because Peter Schmidt and his band, Three on a Hill, they were all 16, 17 years old. They didn't come up in the cover band thing. So he was writing songs early. And they were doing, that's what was remarkable to me about Theater Gallery, was this band of kids, and The End was another one of them.
Right, The End would play like once a month starting in like November of '84. And I remember Peter was from Carrollton. Mm-hmm. Three on a Hill came around like in maybe February or March.
And The End was from Highland Park.
And it's like once Three on a Hill and The End started playing, then there'd be like 20 more bands came out of the woodwork in the next couple of months.
And they were all from the suburbs.
And I got another story that just hit me. Is funny because when I said, because my vision was to have, the art gallery was just amazing. People that have came out of the art scene, Ron English, Bill Havron, all of our artists from North Texas and Texas.
Matt Miller, Jeff Robinson.
Yeah, which is really another discussion, because, music's kind of running the show today. But the theater we had, the avant-garde theater. And everything.
Yeah.
So when I was looking at it, I was looking at it like, well, Scott Matthews, Cardi Talkington was in Scott Matthews' play in January of '85. So what I'm alluding to is I was looking at it like I've got to oversee the gallery, the theater, the music, and create this scene. And you were like, oh, yeah, let's get Jeff to do booking, and you were good at it. And what's amazing to me is how the synergy of everything came together.
And people lived there. It was a community art space that they lived in.
Yeah.
It was a 24/7 job.
Here's the story I can't forget, though. The first thing you did when I was like, okay, Jeff, let's do some booking, because I had Mark Lee. I'd met him at Building the Fast and Cool, but you've canceled the first thing you did was cancel a bunch of bands. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that.
Yeah, check this out. I've booked all these bands, and one of them was like Mardia, Sarandria, or whatever.
The Escorts.
The Escorts. So I book all these bands.
For reasons unknown. I remember there were some bands I didn't like.
Here's what's funny. I was like, okay, Jeff, you can help book. Well, you just all end up like canceling like 5 bands one week, and so it comes out in the news story where Russell Smith writes about this. And so ironically, one of the first pieces of press we got for being a music venue was, why did this new booking agent cancel bands? Remember that?
I don't remember it, but I can totally see me doing that.
Well, they were a little too. See, my policy,
because I didn't really like all the bands that were too polished. There were still these holdovers from the MTV era.
That's right.
Where bands were just trying to get on TV.
My philosophy is, let's do everybody and be open door and be eclectic. And you came in with a little more musical opinion, like, oh no, they're too posery or whatever.
Well, right? Yeah, and like anything in life, like anybody who does anything, what you're trying to do is establish a niche for yourself.
Right.
And I didn't want to try and intrude on someone else's niche. You know what I'm saying? I didn't want us to be another club that did MTV-looking bands.
We didn't need to be Tango.
Yeah.
We couldn't compete there.
Well, I'm sorry if I ever cancel your band.
No, it was fun. It turned out great. I'm just saying, but those guys, a lot of those guys did come back to be really cool, kind of creative types.
Well, a couple of years later, when grunge happened, the fashion around music changed. It went. The Catherine Wheel has a song called "Way Down," and the song "Way Down" is about grunge music, and one of the lines in the song is, "We take this big, expensive sound and wrap it in these rags I found," and that was all about what grunge was kind of like thrift store clothing, and looking like you worked in a garage, or something like that. And that stripped away the veneer of MTV, Duran Duran, visual,
Well, I think you're touching on something that's really, really important to me, and that is the first band that ever played Theater Gallery was called Zeitgeist, which is so symbolically profound. The Zeitgeist means the spirit of the day, right?
Right.
The Zeitgeist, And I think in the 84, 85, the zeitgeist of the day of America I was personally fed up with the shiny clothes, the shiny suit, the shiny building, and the mall that Dallas was. It's phony. And so the whole movement of the Theater Gallery was, I used to tell people, take off your stupid polo shirt and go start a band.
Yeah.
Be who you are. Be real. So I think the zeitgeist of the day was to be raw and real. And that's what you're alluding to with the clothing.
Well, I'll tell you exactly why that happened in 1984. That's because the Republican National Convention came to town. And they had that downtown. Reagan was the president. The Dead Kennedys set up and played. And they had this protest site where people came from all over the country to protest their individual issues. It was just giant melting pot of people from out of town who came, and I made my way down there that day, and it was a revelation to me just to see that many people who obviously weren't Dallasites and what their thoughts were, what their ideas were, how they were articulating their issues. And the idea of the Dead Kennedys set up on the street playing in front of the Republican National Convention in the city where John F. Kennedy was killed, all of that stuff, and there's another component to that too. There was a kid there that day named Greg Johnson who burned an American flag. He was arrested for burning an American flag. His case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and his standing on that was burning an American flag is an example of freedom of speech. He won the case, and it became established precedent that that's what that was. That happened in Dallas in 1984 in front of the National Convention. And as I recall, the stage that the Dead Kennedys played on ended up being the stage at Theater Gallery.
That's correct. I was at the Dead Kennedys show.
Yeah.
And again, I didn't even know you.
Right.
Yeah,
that was a year and a half before we met.
Right. So we both grew up in different sides of Richardson. We were both at the Dead Kennedys. See, this is when you make a movie, if you can weave it like this, you're a really good writer, right? And only God.
It wrote itself, though.
Yeah, only God can write these scripts, So I was there. I remember a kid jumped off the 20-foot tall stack of speakers, jumped off so the crowd would catch him, and nobody caught him. He hit the floor. He hit the concrete.
That happened in Theater Gallery a couple times, too. People jumping off the balcony and no one caught him.
That's why I wasn't ever that punk rock, you know what I mean? I'm maybe a tiny bit of punk rock. But anyway, so yeah, Lori, who was this?
Lori Watson.
Lori Watson ended up living at the Theater Gallery. She was the one that made the love whips for Stevie Ray Vaughan and Jim.
She was an old school hippie throwback.
She called herself self-proclaimed witch. Okay, well, Lori was awesome, and she said, "Hey, this guy, my friend, built the stage at Dead Kennedys, so you can have the stage. And we went over there and got it from his house on a truck and just, nailed it all back together, basically. So the very stage that Jello, your buddy Jello.
Yeah, he was on crutches that day. He had a torn up knee.
Yeah. So it's amazing how the zeitgeist of that day was, and Reagan ended up winning that election.
I know.
Because there was, though, it was almost like the 80s felt like another 60s in a way.
Well, it felt like the counterculture had actually finally found Dallas.
Right.
That, to me, is what happened, because Dallas always has been traditionally politically conservative, and at one time it was the headquarters for the Ku Klux Klan. We've got streets and buildings in Dallas that are named after Klan leaders.
Oh, let me tell you, we don't want to go too far on that rabbit trail, but if you ever see the documentary on the State Fair of Texas.
Yeah, they had a Klan day every year.
The Klan ran Dallas for 30 or 40 years.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Like right out in the open.
Right.
And there's a funny part there. They were trying to make it like a black. They wouldn't let the blacks in the State Fair.
Yeah.
But then there was the Black Citizen Day.
Yeah. And
a lot of blacks revolted and said, no, we don't want one day. We want to be able to go to the fair every day.
Yeah.
Right. So it was a big controversy. It's a good public. It's on PBS. That doc.
Well, the Longhorn Ballroom. You're familiar with the Longhorn Ballroom. It's been a venue in Dallas for decades. They used to have service industry night, what was called service industry night on Monday nights. I mean, typically the Longhorn was where the Sex Pistols played, but it was predominantly a country and western place that white folks went to. But on Monday night, service industry night, all the black folks got to take over the Longhorn. And during that time, everybody from, Otis Redding, Ray Charles, Bobby Blue Bland, Johnny Taylor, Millie Jackson, all those people, B.B. King, they all played there. And if you look online, there's a photograph of Nat King Cole performing there. And if you look in the audience, this was during the period of time when Jack Ruby was running the Longhorn Ballroom. If you look at the audience in that photograph, all the people sitting in the front row, all the people sitting in the tables right in front of the stage, they're all black folks. And all the white people are standing in the back. That was their night. Monday nights were their night.
And so the white people came because the artistry, the music was so good.
Right. White folks have always appreciated African-American culture. Yeah. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. They appreciated and upheld it, at least musically, creatively, artistically.
Yeah. Well, the Longhorn Ballroom is definitely a historic landmark in Dallas. Are you guys reopening that?
Yeah.
I've gathered that somewhere.
Actually, when I left working theater gallery, that's where I went to work. I worked at the Longhorn in 86 and 87. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about Deep Ellum a little more, because here we were, we opened in 84 with the gallery, the avant-garde theater, the bands were coming, and then you and I met, and you and I really built a scene in 85. I mean, things just blew up and took off. And then in 85, towards the end of, by the end of 85, we had Mark Lee at 462 sending all the coolest tours.
Yeah.
Local bands opening on tours. Local bands coming out of the woodwork. Because, I've done it twice now. Once with the theater gallery, we did it. And later, in 98, when I opened the Door on Elm Street, the same thing happened. Like all these millions of bands came out of suburbia.
Yeah.
Original bands at all ages seen at the Door. But anyway, it's not today's show. But so in 85, the momentum was really gathering. But
it was still under the radar, though. I mean, this was before the internet, so it wasn't as easy as just putting a message on Instagram and getting people to come to a show. The way that, this is how I remember it, but the way that I think it happened was a lot of these bands that sprung up during that time period that were all original, they all came from various suburbs. Shallow Rain came from Richardson, Three on a Hill came from Carrollton, The End came from Highland Park, New Bohemians came from East Dallas, Rigor Mortis came from the mid-cities. All of these bands, Buckpats came from Plano. They all came from these various suburbs.
Yeah, they're school. They pass out flyers at school.
Right, and what Deep Ellum was at the time was still completely off the radar. Mm-hmm. I mean, the newspapers hadn't discovered it yet. Theater Gallery was literally the only building down there that had a piece of neon in front of it.
Yeah.
And it was a small one. It was tiny. It wasn't kind of an ostentatious thing like it is now where everything's got big signage and all that. Deep Ellum was still a warehouse district. But the fact that all of these bands could bring their little army of people from Carrollton or Highland Park or whatever, and the way the kids looked at it, and this is how I remember, you may remember it differently, but what I remember talking to them every night is that Deep Ellum was like their secret. You know, it was a way to get away from their parents. It was a way to get away from their culture in their neighborhood and disappear into something else that was away from the suburb that they grew up in.
Absolutely.
So, and all of these
created a world that was beautiful.
Well, and all of these suburbs are different too. You know, some of them are lower middle class, some of them like Highland Park were upper class or whatever. But either way, all of these kids from all these areas all got in there and mixed it up and met each other the same way that I met new kids at Richardson High School. You know, the diversity happened organically and accidentally almost, but it was the foundation of how Deep Ellum started to create a platform for kids who wanted to express themselves creatively rather than just be a rock star, rather than just play somebody else's song and dress like somebody else.
Right. The community, the escape to in creating our own world and the community that evolved in there with the bands going to see each other's gigs, the camaraderie of bands meeting a guy that does painting or a band seeing theater, and that created a community where people could develop as an artist with their peers.
Yeah.
And we weren't bowing down to record labels in the music business. See, to me, that was
we didn't understand what purpose record labels served yet. It wasn't until a couple of the bands started getting record deals and we thought, okay, now we can get our music out there nationally. Yeah. That's what that represented. Back then, I remember we would start little independent record labels just to put a band's record out so they could have a record in the store when you went to the record store.
Right. We had a Deep Ellum record store in Theater Gallery.
Yeah.
And David, the dude, was the
David Adrians.
David Adrians was working the store. I mean, it was our gang comedy in a way. It was a secret place, and it was an underground neighborhood. And as I'll tell you how underground it was. For a solid year, every police car drove right by.
Oh, I know. And the police station was right down the street.
Right. On Canton Street, you had the whatever they called the substation.
Yeah.
So every cop...
They'd drive right by there. We didn't have a liquor license. We didn't have any permits. It was, that place was nailed together with plywood.
Yes.
I mean, we couldn't have passed an inspection if we would have had to.
Well, no. So it was a beautiful clubhouse, hand built.
It was like a tree house.
And then you'd have punks on the sidewalk with 2-foot tall purple hair and the cops driving by.
That was actually the genius of Theater Gallery, is if you looked at it from the front, it looked like an art gallery space. And that I'll never forget walking in there and just seeing, when I saw this little art gallery space, the walls were all nice and white, the art was really well lit, and it just basically looked like an art gallery. But then it had this one door in the corner. You opened up that door, and it opened up into this big room, this big tree house that had natural light, coming through the ceiling, and balconies that were made out of plywood, and
a 10-foot angel that we got from behind a Catholic church, and a bar made out of a boat.
made out of a boat, yeah.
El Barco is beautiful. So we might as well talk about the big night of the change.
That's what made it feel like a secret, though. It's because you think it was an art gallery. And I remember when I was first talking to you about playing there, I thought we were going to set up in the corner. My band was going to set up in the corner and just play in front of a piece of art or something. And then I open up that door, and there's a stage back there, and there's this whole big, beautiful room, that holds 400 people,
Well, we held 1,200 people at times.
Yeah.
I mean, remember the Replacements played, and I was actually working the door, and it was $10.
Yeah, that was a lot of money back then.
$10, and guess what? It was the energy was so awesome.
It was so hot. We didn't have air conditioning.
I'm talking about the anticipation to see Paul Westerberg. It's like they would just give you a 20 and run in the room.
Yeah,
it was a $10 show.
Yeah,
and college kids with no money didn't want their change.
Yeah.
They were throwing 20s and running in the show.
Yeah, the beer was free. They didn't need any change.
Well, I don't know if they even got that. The beer was probably already drunk, Anyway, so let's get to the big night of change. So, yeah, we were under the radar. It was an underground scene. It was beautifully surreal. And then the cops are driving by. And then the first night that I was ever gone when my girlfriend talked me into going to a play. We got to go see this play in Fort Worth. You never do anything with me. So I go to see a play in Fort Worth with Barry, my fake girlfriend. And Jeff, you and Tracy
got arrested.
Yeah. So tell us
Hobbs
about that.
came in. Yeah, I think that was like 2 years in.
No,
because
it wasn't, because in '85 we opened the Profit Bar.
Yeah,
that was like September of '84.
I don't remember exactly when that was, but I mean, basically, they took us in because there were underage kids drinking in there.
Well, it was mostly because we were charging. You go into gallery free.
Yeah.
Typical night at Theater Gallery. You go see an art opening of fresh, avant-garde paint. You could smell it. It was still wet on the walls. The gallery, killer paintings, and then you pay $5 to go into the theater, and it was all the free beer and wine. 3 or 4 awesome, probably a play going.
It was like an art gallery. It was an art gallery opening with bands playing in it.
Yeah,
I mean, beer and wine is usually free at an art gallery.
Yeah, so you see the Flaming Lips at 11:30 after a play, after an art opening, all for $5. So basically, what happened was when the cops busted you guys, it was because we were charging money, and giving out alcoholic beverages without a license, which is technically bootlegging.
I'll tell you exactly why the cops showed up that night is because there was another venue down the street that resented the fact that we weren't playing by the rules.
Right.
They were the ones who tipped the cops off to it.
No doubt.
And let them know, they wanted to have more of a competition dynamic. But that was a place that I would go see shows anyway. I loved that place. I remember we had a really bizarre, competition dynamic back then. But I respected what they were doing too.
Oh yeah, I used to go there, and I didn't really.
Saw so many great shows there.
Looking back, I regret letting a lot of that element come down because the Theater Gallery was very sensitive and really intelligent art scene for quite a while. The art, the painters were intelligent. A lot of the bands like Tench Cox and Peter Smith, there are deeply profound, meaningful lyrics in their music.
Oh, every one of Peter Smith's songs was that way.
And a lot of the punky stuff that ended up coming around, and honestly, I confess, a lot of it we just did it because we could have a big crowd and make money sometimes.
Yeah.
I
was more into punk rock than you were.
It hurt the scene.
Yeah.
It did hurt the scene. So what happened was we got busted for bootlegging, and we had to start going, okay, so then I was like, there's no way they're going to stop the revolution. So we rented the building across the street, right? And that was like in October of '85. So September must have been the bust. And then the city's like, okay, you guys have to be legit. You've got to get permits and license and everything. So I go down to on Jefferson, in Dallas and Oak Cliff. I was like, okay, well, we need to open the Theater Gallery, or, we're open, but y'all didn't know it, so we need some permits. And they go, well, you can't do anything. You don't have any parking down there.
Yeah.
And all the good old boys down on Jefferson, they didn't know what we were going to do, and they didn't care.
Yeah.
You're in trouble, boy, So I went to somebody told me to go to the city hall and talk to Leif Sandberg, the cantilevered city hall building.
Yeah.
So I go up there. It was a brand new building then. And I met Leif and I said, hey, man, we're doing this art gallery and music and it's really cool. And he goes, yeah, I've read about it. I know what you guys are doing down there. He goes, listen, go down there and tell them about this PD 198. It's a planned development for Deep Ellum. And you can exempt your parking in your gallery, 2,500 square feet.
Yeah.
And you could exempt your theater if you just kind of tell them they're separate spaces. So Leif tells me what to do. I go back to Jefferson, and I ended up being the guy educating the good old boys on what a PD 198 was. So you're welcome, all you guys that have made millions of dollars off Deep Ellum all these decades. So yeah, we kicked it off for you, and it's awesome because we actually got permitted at Theater Gallery. I remember this memory just came back. So I lived above the boat, El Barco, in this little room. Remember when that inspector came and he had that huge, weird, deformed nose?
I don't remember that.
And he's like, you get out and have an exit, you're going to roast like a weenie up there. I remember you laughing about it that day. So we had to change some things at Theater Gallery. So meanwhile, we were at the Profit Bar across the street, and it was like, okay.
And we moved in upstairs. We lived upstairs above Profit.
Right. We're going to have a legit bar at the Profit Bar.
Yeah.
And we can have an older crowd, and that was the artistic saloon for the sake of money to support the arts and the revolution at Theater Gallery. So that was '85 in the fall, and that's when the Chili Peppers came.
Yeah.
Because the first Red Hot Chili Pepper gig in Dallas, was they came upstairs at the Profit Bar.
Yeah, I took them to my mom's house. We went and washed their clothes. I took them out to North Dallas. And took them to Bill's.
Oh, you ran them around, of course.
And Bill gave Anthony that skirt, that red, white, and blue skirt that he wore. He wore that for years afterwards. Anthony found that in a cardboard box underneath a bunch of records.
Well, that's my point. That was a life-changing day for the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yeah.
They came upstairs at the Profit Bar with their weeds and their cups on their jackets.
Anthony's dad was their tour manager.
So check this out. The Profit Bar was just opening in that late November.
Yeah.
And the Chili Peppers gig was like that week. So I had the first Profit Bar flyer with Sitting Bull on it. Mm-hmm. And I remember Anthony goes, "Oh, that's really cool." And like the next day, he had Sitting Bull tattooed on his arm. So he got the Sitting Bull tattoo and the skirt.
Yeah.
So, they made us a cool event, and we helped them, go on the road and be as cool as they turned out to be. So in '85, we had the Theater Gallery, the Profit Bar. I don't think any other club had opened in Deep Ellum until.
No, they're before Theater Gallery. There was Studio D, which is a punk.
Well, that was
rock club.
'83.
That was '83.
Yeah, but I'm talking about in the like Clearview came in. They remember. Let's talk about the party across the street.
Yeah.
Right. So I think Clearview opened in early '85.
Well, the first Clearview was over on Elm Street.
Right.
It was where that school is now.
But the first time we ever encountered.
The first time we ever encountered, you and I were sitting in front of Theater Gallery. It was the middle of a Saturday afternoon, I think. It was really hot. We had been hosing the place out, trying to get it cleaned up from the night before the next show rolled in that night. And Jeff Swaney, who neither one of us knew, pulled up on his $300 bicycle.
No, well, yeah, he had a Saab Turbo the other way. He had a bicycle.
No, he was on a bicycle on this day, and he was wearing a bike suit, one of those shiny spandex bike suits or whatever.
Right.
And he didn't even introduce himself. He knew who we were, but he pulls up on his bicycle and he said, "I just rented this building across the street. I'm going to put you guys out of business." It wasn't like welcome to the neighborhood or I'd love to be involved in this community or anything like that. It was immediately a competition dynamic from minute one, from literally the first thing that came out of his mouth. Mm-hmm. So I knew we were always going to have a contentious relationship with him. The thing was, one of his partners was a guy that I had gone to high school with, Steve Clohessy. So as far as like my band playing there and doing stuff at Clearview or me DJing or whatever, I had Steve. I had kind of an insider who unfortunately was partners with Swaney, who I couldn't get along with at all.
Yeah, the way I remember that first episode.
I just resented the fact that he said that, right off the bat.
Well, yeah. Well, we're hanging out at the Theater Gallery one day, and a Saab Turbo pulls up across the street, and he starts painting. Swaney started painting the plywood covering up the windows at the warehouse, which is now Buzz Brews. Okay.
Yeah.
And he was this ugly green color, and he wrote "Life in a Warehouse."
Yeah.
Now, I mean, I was living in a warehouse,
They did like 2 or 3 after-hours parties there. They tried to do it like we were doing it with no permits. And I remember they had Divine come and perform there.
That was over on Elm. I'm talking about that first thing was like in August of '85.
Yeah. And it was a beer party, though. It was a free beer party.
It was pizza and beer for $20.
Yeah.
And you had all those chicks with high heels, like breaking their heels and falling down.
Yeah.
So anyway, so the Saab Turbo pulls up. Swaney paints that. He comes and yells at something across the street at us. And then Kenny, that was this artist, I don't remember his last name at the moment. He was living upstairs at the Profit Bar.
Yeah, the curly blonde hair guy.
Yeah, from L.A.
Yeah.
He was the one that had the gig to remodel Shannon's club as Fast and Cool. He's the one that brought me in on remodeling Shannon's, making the Fast and Cool club. So he went and put Yuppie Go Home over the thing that Swaney had just painted. And Swaney came back, and that's when he came and yelled at you and I.
Well, the thing is, the takeaway from all of that is that back then, nobody was seeing Deep Ellum as this thing that they could exploit and become a millionaire.
Well, I think Swaney.
He was the first one that came.
That.
He was the first one that came through and did that.
Yeah.
And in his mind, he could only do that at our expense.
Yeah.
The only way that could happen, there's no way we could coexist, You know, the only way that could happen is if he could put us out of business and take over what we had already done.
I guess you're right in it. I just don't ever think of putting people out of business. I
I
kind of
don't
look
either.
at it like, let's do something.
There's room for everybody. There's always been room for everybody.
You would think. So basically, I think the timeline would be August of '85. You know, we saw Swaney, had his party, and then we opened the Profit Bar, and then the Chili Peppers came and all that, and the scene got super thick. I mean, then I remember the Club Dada guys.
Club Dada, not too long after that, 86.
Well, Club Dada guys would sit at the Profit Bar
Right.
and take notes and flirt with Crystal, the waitress, for a long time before they opened.
And it's important to know what Club Dada was in the very beginning. Club Dada was centered around a performance art group called Victor Dada. It was a group of guys who, I believe they had been down to Austin and they had seen the way Esther's Follies was set up. You remember Esther's Follies on 6th Street?
Yes.
It was kind of a live performance art thing where they did comedy, sketch comedy, like a live Saturday Night Live. And the window behind the stage opened up out onto the street. So you'd have as many people out on the street watching their performances as were inside. So the guys at Club that were doing Victor Dada Performance Art Group, they wanted to have a club. They wanted to have a venue that was the home base for their performance art thing, where they could do that every week, and it would be kind of like an Esther's Follies type thing. That wasn't sustainable that early on in Deep Ellum. It just wasn't. One performance art group, no matter how good they were going to be able to drive an entire club.
It's not that monetizable.
A lot of those guys are just too smart. Their comedy was too smart. It wasn't broad enough. You know, it was really super hyper intelligent, which unfortunately isn't going to draw a huge audience. A huge audience isn't really going to, of smart people isn't going to sit there and watch comedy.
Right.
So they had to bring live music.
They had a lofty goal of having this pseudo cool art club, and then they had to bring bands to pay the rent. And then it became a really legitimate venue because
the outdoor, the backyard piece is what made it.
Well, you and I, we were working together a long time, and I think when you and I kind of had our little falling out, you went to Dada next, right?
Dada and Longhorn at the same time.
Both at the same time. Okay. So yeah, Deep Ellum went from, the theater gallery kicking it off. The Profit Bar came in out of just really to stay alive and keep the revolution going. I really look at it that way. We had to get legit. We had to get legal. And then, Clearview came in, and then Dada, and then the video bar, and it just exponentially exploded as a legit scene.
Actually, there was one other club down there too. There was a rock and roll bar down on the end of Commerce Street.
On the Rocks.
On the Rocks, yeah.
86.
And that, to me, there was always kind of the anomaly. They were always kind of the outlier. They were the one club down there that had air conditioning.
They had money to start.
Right, and they had neon. They were the first one to really flesh their place out with neon on the outside. But they were also a throwback to that old cover band thing. It was all cover bands playing rock and roll songs.
Well, at that time, Deep Ellum was. You and I used to go ride around in my car up, and we'd put out flyers all over Greenville Avenue.
I remember making flyers at 3:00 in the morning at Kinko's on Upper Greenville.
You and I drove to record stores, and we went on Greenville and stapled them on poles and took them to record stores, and everybody. It's like, hey, we'd hand them to people and say, "There's a club in Deep Ellum." Everybody's like, "What's that?"
Yeah. I remember I didn't want to use the name Deep Ellum in the very beginning. That was something that I didn't get. You know what I'm saying? That was something that was your thing. I remember that because I remember you were calling the neighborhood Deep Ellum, and I was aware of the history, the Depression era history, and all that. But I remember being slightly uncomfortable with the fact that Ellum is a mispronunciation of the word elm.
Right.
And I was like, are we really going to do that? I mean, use African dialect,
Well, you were certainly sensitive for 1980.
I wasn't being sensitive. It just kind of gave me a weird stomach ache to think that we were doing this.
Well, right.
Now, the more I learned about the history, the more I learned about how what we were doing, it wasn't, I may have been by design with you, but with me, it wasn't about resurrecting an old neighborhood. It was about maintaining a secret. Maintaining this kind of secret subculture down there.
Well, people may not know that the word Deep Ellum, it's like during that era, theater happened all up and down Elm Street.
Right. Up to where the Majestic is, yeah.
On the western end was high society theater.
Yeah.
The Majestic was in the middle, still pretty high class. And then over on the east side, in the Deep Ellum area, where all the Jewish landlords ran into the blacks.
And the pawn shops.
That's Deep Ellum over there, right? Which is another funny story. Remember when Screamin' Jay came to town?
Yeah.
And Screamin' Jay, we pull up at the Profit Bar, and he's standing looking around. I said, "Hey, Jay, you ever been to Deep Ellum?" He goes, "Deep Melon?
Yeah.
I was here a long time ago."
Yeah. Well, when you got the Legendary Revelations together, that's when I realized that we're actually bridging a gap. You know what? We're not exploiting something. We're paying homage to it.
Herbie Cowens played the drums in Deep Ellum in the 30s.
So did Buster Smith.
And then they played the Profit Bar before the...
And Alex Moore. I remember sitting there talking to Alex Moore one afternoon, and he was just telling me what the neighborhood was like and telling me how, you know, people would take the trolley car or whatever from Martin Luther King Boulevard into Deep Ellum, you know, down Oakland Avenue, what was Oakland Avenue at the time. And I realized then that, you know, this isn't a bad thing necessarily to recognize the past history of this neighborhood and to uphold it and try and uphold it with the same kind of counterculture.
You know, it's funny you brought up Legendary Revelations. Mm-hmm. Somebody sent me this flyer. Somebody posted on Facebook recently. You'll never guess of all the people you would probably know because you're a music historian. I want to say you're a very creative guy. You're a good writer. You're great at putting bands together. I like your writing. So
Thanks.
Don't say I'm not a good writer anymore. That's that's self-deprivation. You're good at a lot of things. Listen to me. I want to see. We're going to test Jeff Liles, who's I'm a know-it-all. He's kind of a know-it-all. Jeff, of all people, should know this, but I don't know. Who did the Legendary Revelations open up for on purpose at the Profit Bar? Because I always wanted to put them in front of the kids to educate them on the history of Deep Ellum.
They used to play there every week.
Well, we had a weeknight, but sometimes we'd put them on a Saturday night too. Like for the road show or something. It's too hard of a question.
Yeah, I can't remember.
You won't believe this. Here it is, the flyer. Driving and Crying.
Oh, I remember that.
The night the Legendary Revs were booked to open, they were playing when Driving and Crying got busted for coke in the parking lot.
Okay, I'll tell you how that happened too. I remember that now, and here's how that happened. There was an A&R person from Island Records named Kim Bowie. And Kim was the A&R person who came to Dallas and heard all these Deep Ellum bands and put together the Sound of Deep Ellum compilation album. The other band that she had signed, and one of those bands on that album was Legendary Revelations. Mm-hmm. The other band that she had signed to Island at the same time was Driving and Crying. That was her idea, to put them on with Legendary Revelations.
I think she was just routing them through and called and said, "Hey, I got to get them a gig." And
that's the point. She wanted that band seen within the context of a hip underground subculture.
It could be, yeah.
And she loved the Legendary Revelations. She absolutely loved them and recognized immediately what their contribution was to the neighborhood.
I'm going to have to say, we could talk about Deep Ellum and music for hours. Our show does have an ending point. So now I have to ask you a question. I ask every guest on the show, and you're more than a guest. You're my lifelong friend and brother. So here's the question, and we can allude back to Deep Ellum if need be, but we're close to our ending time because all good things must end, and this has been fun. So I have to ask you, just for the world out there, what do you think about God today?
About God?
Yes.
Well, I'm an atheist. I don't think much about God, to tell you the truth.
So I've heard you say that, but are you sure you want to go with atheist, not agnostic?
Well, atheism is a conclusion.
Yes.
It's not a belief; it's a conclusion. We really don't even need the word atheism. We don't need the word atheist. We don't have a word for someone who isn't a nuclear physicist. I mean, atheism is an absence of religion. And I don't have a problem with people being spiritual or believing in a higher power. If they want to turn over their will, their consciousness to a higher power, and that works for them, that keeps them mobile, that keeps an emotional equilibrium, I'm all for that 100%. Mm-hmm. What I'm against is wars over religion. What I'm against is people thinking that because I believe in this God or this religion or whatever, that gives me the license to impose my will on someone else who believes a different religion. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, all of it seems really counterintuitive for the reason that religion exists in the first place, which is peace and harmony. You know, that if all the religions in the world, all the people's different gods and their different beliefs and their higher powers, all had a unique and cogent, holistic view on peaceful coexistence, I'd be 100% behind religion. I'd love it. My father's a minister, you know, and I recognize his faith. I recognize it works for him. You know, he's a good man. He's a good man with a good heart.
So what you're saying is you respect other people's beliefs, and you believe
absolutely
that a belief in a spiritual reality can help people, but your personal conclusion is you don't necessarily think there's a God or need a God.
Well, listen.
That's why I'm giving you a chance to go with agnostic.
Okay.
Because agnostic says...
I honestly don't know the difference between agnostic or atheist.
Agnostic is saying that you don't know if there's a God or not a God. In other words, it's beyond knowing. Whereas atheist is like, oh, there just ain't no God by God.
Well, if that's the case, everybody is agnostic, because everyone thinks that they know God. They think that they have a personal relationship with God. And honestly, I don't see much evidence of an omnipotent God that can course correct the negative things that are happening on this planet. Fights over oil, fights over war, fights over political beliefs.
That's the biggest objective in the modern world that people have to a loving and sovereign God is, why is he letting suffering continue?
Famine,
rape. I would suggest that we've got to realign our expectation of what is God's agenda. Because if his agenda is to make the world a country club, then he's not doing his job. But if his agenda is a deeper spiritual agenda, then maybe he is in fact doing his job. We just don't quite understand his ways completely.
Well, human beings have the capacity to make rational decisions. You know, our rationality should be an example of who we are as people. You know, you and I aren't sitting here duking it out. We have different religious beliefs or whatever. We're not sitting here punching each other over it.
Well, not yet.
Not now or not ever. I mean, I'm not going to fight anybody over their religious beliefs.
Of course not. And you know what? I completely agree with the point you made earlier. And that is, and I will say that why is it that all the religions presuppose that they're promoting peace, and they are the only ones? Like the Jews have the God, and the Christians have the God, and the Muslims have God, and the Hindus have God, and yet they fight and there's conflict and all that. So I agree with that, and my answer to that would be that religion is not God. You have to separate those two things. Because God did not make religion.
Yeah.
Man, see, my belief, and I know this to be true, it's not faith to me anymore. I actually had an encounter with the Spirit, the eternal Spirit of Christ, which we didn't even talk about that effect on the deep Ellum scene or anything like that, but I met God, okay? So what I know is that God's true and real, but religion is what man did with finding out some stuff about God. The first thing the Roman soldiers did after they crucified God in the flesh, and they go, wow, and there was lightning and an earthquake, and the Romans like, that was the Son of God. They started gambling for his clothes, his robe, and his sandals and everything. So to me, I think religion merchandises Christ, and religion merchandises God, and religions use God and the book to empower and enslave and cause the conflicts and use it for their own personal human agendas. So to me, the key is to separate God and his truth and reality away from what man does with God.
Well, I think my fundamental issue with it is just the use of fear to leverage behavioral patterns and traits. Religion basically tells you we need you to be a good person or else.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't do that, you're going to burn for eternity.
That's a huge thing I also agree with you on. Here's the deal. Most Christianity is sold with, you got to repent and receive and come to our building or you're going to go to hell. But from what I've read, because knowing God and now I've read the Bible, and I was completely ignorant. I didn't grow up in religion. And what I see the Bible saying is that we turned from God in the garden and we all died spiritually. Because remember, God says, if you eat of that, you'll die. But yet they were still alive physically. But spiritually we died, so we were disconnected. So to me, it's all the issue is, are we connected to God? Do we have that eternal life? Because to me, it's like you hear the typical Baptist preachers like, boy, you got to come up here and say a prayer, you're going to go to hell. To me, it's not about hell or heaven. It's more profoundly about, are we reconnected to the life force, the Spirit of God that Christ made that way for by the sacrifice and the resurrection. It's all about the resurrection.
All right, let me ask you this. Okay. Religion, the fundamental premise of religion is join our group, join our gathering of people that share these like beliefs,
That is
whatever.
religion, yes.
This country right now, and many other countries on this planet, are suffering right now from a preponderance of cult mentality. These are, when I say cult, I mean any group.
The polarization.
The polarization is part of it, but I'm talking about cult mentality. Everything from religion to the KKK to QAnon to Oath Keepers, Three Percenters, all of these people, they're little groups. They're little cult factions.
You mentioned the left groups.
There are left groups too. I'm saying that, believe me, it's not adherent to any one political group. Our country in general, we're so tribal. Yes. You know, cults can be AA. Cult can be Dallas Cowboy football fans. You know, it could just be people who all share this like-minded belief and believe it is the end-all, be-all to their existence. And the thing is, if there is a God, and God gave each one of us the ability to think as individuals and to come to individual conclusions based on our own life experiences, based on our own interactions with other people, isn't that what a God would really want? Is for us to fully use our capacity to think?
Absolutely.
You know, and not be in a cult, not say, oh, all these other people are doing this, so I need to do it too. I can't step outside the lines of what their beliefs are. I can't step outside the line. You know,
let me tell you something. You're so right. God created us in his image as each unique flowers, or to use that metaphor. And I fight what you're talking about all the time. Being part of the Christian thing now, I see Christians negating individuality all the time. And you're exactly right. I totally agree. So the bottom line is this. You're a thinker. You're open-minded. I know you're a seeker. You believe what you believe today. You know, I believe what I believe today. And we all go through time and it changes.
I believe's not the right word for it, though.
Okay.
We know what we think. We know what we experience. We know where both of us are 60 years old. We have 60 years of life experience to
No, wait, I've been using a fake ID this whole time. I'm 52 now.
But we have all come to these various conclusions
Yes.
about what we know to be true.
But you know those could change.
Of course, they change all day. They change every day.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, your different experiences inform who you are emotionally, who you are intellectually.
Right.
You know, all you know is what you experience, and that to me, the religion and God, the whole idea of this invisible person or this invisible entity or these invisible ideals. I mean, what I know is what I can see, touch, taste, feel, hear. You know, that's what I believe in, is the things that I actually can experience firsthand.
I understand, but I know this. We're back to Deep Ellum. I went and moved in a ghost town in Deep Ellum because I just hated them all in Dallas. And you
I loved them all.
Well, now
I loved Valley View Mall. That's where I met Van Halen. You know,
well, now you can go enjoy them all. Or
now malls don't even exist. You know,
my point though was that I'm talking about the cloning of society.
Yeah,
I just call it the mall for short. My point is, I went there searching for there's got to be more in life.
Yeah.
And I found more in Deep Ellum. I found people like you and bands and painters. And I found a world, and we created a world that was a beautiful thing. And then I didn't really premeditate my black janitor and his family cleaning up my clubs and talking to me and loving me.
And him sharing his spirituality with you. That's a real thing.
But no, he took me.
He spoke to you those words, you heard it, and it became real.
No, but he took me to his house church in his apartment, and I met God there.
No,
Separate
you met
from
the
him.
idea of God.
No, I'm telling you what happened now. is I actually met God there, and he was just a part of the servant that brought it to be. So my point is that God can interrupt your life. I didn't premeditate it. I would have been the guy set up to be the guy in Deep Ellum that was like, oh, hey, everybody, I've got to tell you something you don't want to hear now. You know what I mean? Jesus is really true. It's not just a storybook. And I know you don't believe it yet. I'm just saying.
Let me ask you this. Okay, churches are huge. They're everywhere. Why does Jesus need a publicist?
Jesus doesn't have a publicist.
You sure he does?
Is it some Jewish chick? I don't know.
No, whoever testifies to you about their experience that turns you in his direction is his publicist.
That's the same. What you just said. Wait a minute. You are a publicist for music and bands and art.
Right.
Jeff Liles is an evangelist.
No, evangelists and publicists are two totally different things.
Okay, so you're a publicist because if you dig something, you go tell everybody you know about it.
That's right. You share something that
That's how
you
we're
find value in.
We're created like that.
Right.
God doesn't need it. Okay? He saves people out in the middle of nowhere. We're just giving them a vision with no evangelist or publicist. He wants to share his labor in these.
Why is testimony such a key, essential element of religion? All it is people sharing their experience with God, how God changed my life, how I needed God and I found him, and now God's in my life or whatever. And that they feel the need to have to share that with others. My father is a minister, and he doesn't even share that out with that many people.
Well, that's a great question.
He speaks about God in a matter-of-fact way, not in a way like you better believe in him or you're going to burn in hell.
Well, no, and I'll answer
like, this
that.
is what works for me. And I even pray with him when we go eat at dinner in restaurants and stuff because I respect his...
That's beautiful. I'll just say this. We're way over time, so I'm kind of getting a little jumpy. So I'll just say this. I respect this debate and this conversation because you're intelligently looking at the issues. Okay, that's a big thing. It really is. So, hey, I got a book, Russell Hobbs' book. Check it out. It's been a great show. Thank you, Jeff, for coming and talking. And, just we're talking about you growing up and memories in Deep Ellum. And I got to spring the God question on every guest, so don't take it like it was just you.
I was really expecting it. It doesn't bother me a bit. I
dig it because life is short. It's fleeting. We don't know what's going to happen tonight or tomorrow. And I really care about you, and I care about everybody. So I want a segment of this show to talk about the reality and just keep us in the forefront of all of our minds. Why are we here? Were we created by this guy that cares, or now he doesn't care? You know what I mean? Sometimes it feels like he doesn't care. So anyway, I just want to say thank you so much for coming. Sure. And we'll do it again.